Welcome to the channel. Today we're painting on an 11 by 14 panel. We're using the Maybeth easel, French easel, Hansa Yellow Light, Naphthol Red, Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Sienna, Yellow Ochre, Ivory Black, and Titanium White. For the medium today, I'm using Liquin. This is a number 4 hog bristle brush, flat, or it used to be flat. I put my brush in that first, and then we're going to start with the darks. I'm going to do a sketch in with ultramarine blue and then burnt sienna. I'm going to mix those together. I have already stained the panel. Instead of looking at a completely white panel, I like to stain it with a burnt sienna and allow it to dry completely. And then I just pull it off my shelf and use it when I'm ready. This helps cut down on the glare of light on the panel and also provides a nice background shade in case a little part of that will show through the final painting, perhaps. Today we're working on barns. I have a reference photo, or actually several reference photos that are off to the right, and rather than distract you by looking at that, because I tend to just use those as models for a few parts of my paintings, and so it's not going to be an actual rendering of one particular photo that I've taken, but rather a combination of several. And then I allow myself artistic license to do as I wish. Here, I'm just measuring out using my paintbrush to determine the angles. If you are new to the channel, I do encourage you to subscribe. This will really help out, and you will be notified as soon as I release a new video. These are the rooftops of the barns. Some folks would describe my painting as expressionistic, others impressionistic. I would say I'm more of an expressionistic painter than impressionistic, perhaps. But I'll let viewers decide. So here I've set up the two main barn structures. Now I'm putting in a silo. Nice thing about oils, even if I were to make a mistake, I can always wipe it off completely using some mineral spirits. Today I'm using Gamsol. I find that Gamsol mineral spirits are the least harmful to the environment, I believe, and also the less irritating in terms of the fumes or anything. Of course, there still are fumes coming off, so do be careful. You want to always paint in a well-ventilated studio. Here, I'm just putting outlines for some foliage, some trees that are also going to be in the painting. And here, nothing is very precise. One thing that was frustrating for me when I first began painting was realizing that every single mark does not have to be perfect. I was under some impression that every single mark that I put on the painting from the very get-go was going to stay, and that I couldn't change or manipulate it in any way. And so I get very, very frustrated. even with the initial sketch. Working through that, I've discovered that that's how a painting is actually created. By putting layer upon layer upon layer, starting with very thin washes, and then building up your paint layers on top of one another. And the looser your brushstrokes, and sometimes even the sketch itself, actually creates a lot of interest for your viewers. Oftentimes, paintings that are very tight are uninteresting. One thing I discovered was that my goal was not going to be to become a realist painter. While I admire a lot of realist painters who do excellent work, Joseph McGurl is one of those. However, while certainly a lot of practice goes into that craft, and you can achieve a high degree of realism by learning how to look at nature and to copy colors in the field, I've noticed that realistic paintings do not particularly move me. I'm more moved by paintings that look somewhat similar to nature in reality, but there is definitely the artist creating something that's never been created before. Seeing with some unique eyes or unique perspective a particular scene excites me much more, along with loose brushstrokes, texture, and other techniques that draw the interest in. If you like this video, please make sure to give a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind. Here, this is a dark mixture for green, using a little bit of the Hansa yellow light, as you saw, and then ultramarine blue. I use a pretty limited palette, as you noticed. There are 3 earth tones, the burnt sienna, the yellow ochre, and the ivory black, which sort of work like primaries that are dulled down. Burnt sienna is the red, yellow ochre, of course, is the yellow, and the ivory black actually can work as a blue. And then I use high pigmented red, yellow, and blue. For that blue, it's ultramarine blue. For the yellow, Hansa yellow light, and then naphthol red. I try to stay away from the heavy metals that you find in the cadmiums, even though they have a long history in oil painting and have held up over many, many decades. Since so many artists use those colors, another facet is trying to be a little different, using a few different shades, producing different mixtures of color. It seemed to me that it would be impossible to do that unless you vary some of the colors that you're using. I would encourage you to explore. Use different color palettes. Start out perhaps with a minimalist palette. Only a few colors, the primaries, titanium white, until you get used to color mixing and to creating tonal values. Tonal values just mean how dark or how light a color potentially is in terms of its saturation. You dull a color down by mixing it with another color, or titanium white. I would also caution you from reaching for titanium white too soon in the painting process. Doing that, in my own experience, led to a number of paintings that had a chalky type of appearance. My over reliance on trying to use titanium white to make a color toned down actually backfires. When you're wanting to lighten a color, think first about adding a yellow, whether that be a Hansa yellow light or some other yellow that is on your palette, preferably than trying to use titanium white. Here I continue to work on the foliage. And of course, during the painting process, you will need to clean your brushes off. Rather than always reaching for the Gamsol, as you noticed, a simple paper towel will take off almost all of the color. And sometimes it's advantageous to leave a little bit of that color actually in the bristles, so that, in essence, every color mixture that you're making has all three primaries in it. Here, I'm adding some titanium white to this green mixture. Adding some Hansa yellow light to create a dulled down purple, purplish blue, that's going to become part of the background right behind the barns. Always good to mix enough so that you don't run out of that color as you're actually applying the paint to the panel. Now here we go, painting in the background. One of the things I'm really going for now is a dark sky background along with the greens as a way of contrasting the barns. So clearly, this particular painting is going to look more expressive than perhaps realistic. For one thing, I'm not using a photo reference to paint this particular color, obviously. What I am doing is setting the painting up so that the high contrast of values will immediately pull your eye into the barns, where the highlights are going to be and where the focal point is going to be. Knowing ahead of time what the plan of the painting is can really help you to think through the process of how you're going to accentuate the focal points, how you're going to handle the sky, how you're going to handle the different shapes. Here at this point, you'll notice I'm focusing on the big shapes and getting a thin layer of paint on the panel as quickly as I possibly can. The more you think about painting, oftentimes the more unintentional patterns develop. Patterns that are unintentional draw the viewer's attention and oftentimes can ruin a painting. What we're trying to do is to be spontaneous. In nature, there are very few patterns. So I vary the brushstrokes as best I can. And one of the ways not to do that is to not think so much about how you're doing it, other than varying your approach. You want the unexpected brushstroke, the unexpected color shift sometimes. And here notice that I help to further define my initial sketch in by the colors being painted next to one another or into one another, wet into wet. This actually produces sharper lines than you would ever get if you tried to do so by simply using a thin brush and trying to accomplish the same. Notice I haven't really shifted to a different brush. This is now a 4 or a 6 flathead. I use brushes that are made by Princeton. This is the Ashley line. This is one of their economic lines. I don't find that spending tons of money on brushes is all that helpful. As long as it's a good brush, in other words, maybe stay away from the Michaels, stay away from the local stores that tend to sell very cheap products. A good brush will run you $6 to $10. Larger brushes, more expensive, of course. Here's a mixture of titanium white now. And I'm going to introduce some liquid. Titanium white is notorious for slow drying, and so it helps to have some liquid in it. Now I've introduced the Hansa Yellow Light. Mixing it in with my brush. Saves time than trying to switch all the time to a palette knife. And you may wish to do that too. In a painting like this, I will save the palette knife simply for cleaning off the palette from time to time. Here, I'm attempting to get a contrast between a lighter tree and the dark greens that I've placed already. Here the object is simply to, once again, cover the canvas with paint. Any detail work will actually happen later on in the painting process, so I don't want to spend a lot of time laboring over this. This will also allow a little bit of time for this paint to actually set up a little bit on the canvas panel. There. I'll leave that set like that for a little bit. A few strokes here and there. And now you can tell almost a half of the painting is now covered with the initial block in. Now I'll clean off that brush with a paper towel. Sometimes I will have two brushes, one dedicated to the lights or the warmer colors, which would be the yellows and the reds, and one dedicated to the cooler colors, which would be your ultramarine blues. Introducing this to provide a little bit of variety. A few strokes here and there. Here I'm just thinking about making sure that it looks rather random. Where is the light catching? Here, of course, is where a good reference photo, or better yet, painting outdoors can really assist. You're trying to capture the light and the different colors that you're seeing in the light. When you use one color in one place of the painting, it's always a good idea to try to find other places where that same color might be utilized. This will help to create color harmony throughout the entire painting. And here you've noticed that I've added it to certain sections of the foreground, the grasses. Adding some yellow ochre to this mixture. Notice I don't need a new pool of color to do this. I can work right into certain pools of color that are already on the palette. Sometimes I find it easiest to sit and paint, even if it's outdoors, as well as in the studio. At other times, I enjoy standing and painting, whether that be in the studio or outside. Varying your posture can help break some habits and give some of your artistic forms a new perspective. Whatever you do, one of the reasons why oil painters often use very long brushes is so that they can stand back from the painting. This will help loosen up the brush strokes, keep the painting rather fresh, and keep your eye looking at the subject matter and not worrying too much about the details. The details will come later. Here I'm applying a color which I think might work as at least the base coat for the barn's roof. Although the barn roof used to be red, over time it is weathered. These are old barns. Barns have stood the test of time, but have also seen much better days. I find those the best to paint. Here, I'm cutting back into the shapes. Once again, wiping with a paper towel, rather than always trying to dip into mineral spirits, will help you paint quicker and realize that you can't entirely paint with clean brushes with every stroke, nor do you wish to or want to. Here, I've lightened that color up considerably. Indicating shadow portions where the light is shining and others where it is much darker. We're looking for contrast today. At various times, I will step back from the painting too to see how the overall feel is going. It is one of the important things to remember when you're painting is that you want to paint over all of the canvas, not focusing on just one area, but continuing to paint all at once. Here, adding the top to the silo. The oil company that I'm using right now is Utrecht. I find that Utrecht and Gamlin products are the most economical while providing the best value as well as highly pigmented colors. Some people swear by certain brands. Once again, it's up to you to do some testing. Every artist that I know that paints tries a lot of different paints. Now, if you have the mindset of painting some with palette knives, I've got another video on that, and we'll be producing more in the future. Keep in mind that you will use a lot more paint, and I would recommend a Utrecht brand or Gamblin, or even some high-grade student paints, because the effects that you're attempting to get will be easier with thicker paint. You certainly don't want to use palette knife painting using a bunch of Michael Harding paints, which cost a fortune. The little tubes will go quickly. I would also remind you that when you're buying paint, to purchase the larger tubes, usually they come in 150, sometimes I've seen them in 200 milliliter tubes. You will notice that the cost per ounce is considerably less than when you purchase the smaller tubes of 37 milliliters and 40 milliliters. Now, if the main strategy is to reduce weight when you're painting outdoors, then you may indeed, especially if you are using brushes, I would recommend purchasing the 37 milliliter tubes to save yourself some weight. Or, better yet, buy the large tubes, and then when the large tubes are almost gone, put those in your outdoor plein air setup, and keep the large unused tubes, or the tubes that are almost full, for your studio use, and then continue the rotation of swapping out full tubes when they get almost empty into your outdoor set. This will be the best way to save some money. Now here you notice I'm just working with different varieties of red and pink. I'm paying attention to the shadows as well as where the lights are hitting. But I'm not particularly interested at this point in replicating the exact colors that I see in the reference photos. What I'm interested in doing is putting these pinks next to that purple background and the greens, and allowing us to see how these colors, even though they are attempting to mirror the actual effect of sun hitting these structures, I also want to give a sort of artistic impression of color. And these colors do not necessarily have to represent what we see in life. Sometimes you'll see me flick the brush like I did there for a second. I'm actually imagining myself putting the stroke down on the canvas. And what I'm trying to do is sort of practice and then allow myself to then finally put the stroke down on the canvas. Sometimes I do that in order to loosen up. Here I am, taking a step back, see how the progress of the painting is coming and what I need to do to improve it. If you like my artwork, by the way, I have a website where you can find out more information about me. It's davidwpoe.com. Once again, davidwpoe.com.
Hey.
Yes.
Meet Miranda and Mitch at Big Boys at noon. For what? Hey, do you want to take my dirty laundry over the other side?
Sure.
I will. I gotta get it. I want to go to Fat Boys. That's what Grandpa calls it. That kid's too smart for his own good.
Yes, he is. Oh, I was getting up to do that.
Yeah, I can see.
Well, I'm doing a painting video. I'm talking over. I'm giving instructions on painting.
Oh, so am I supposed to shut up?
No, you just might be on the video.
I'm going to be over here banging around. I can't.
That's all right. Life goes on in a busy artist family with a small studio in the basement. Notice how you can vary the strokes, sometimes vertical, sometimes horizontal. Doing horizontal strokes on the silo, which will hopefully help to provide some texture and give the sense that the silo is circular in its shape and form. I'm still keeping the layers of paint relatively light, so that way I can apply a thicker paint on top of the other. This is still the block-in stage at this point in time. Once again, taking the titanium white and now mixing in a little bit of that purple color. What I'm doing now is producing a color that will appear somewhat shaded, toned down, but still bright in comparison to the other colors around it. Remember that colors are all about relationships. And while this color certainly stands out against the greens and the darker purples that I placed earlier, it is nowhere near as white as titanium white straight out of the tube. And that's very important at this stage. In fact, I want this to be a lot darker, so that way the other side of that barn will be the one that the focal point will exist on. And so the color on that wall will need to be much lighter. Keeping that in my mind will help me later on. Sometimes, at least I've experienced it, I will go too light in terms of the tonal value, not giving myself enough room. And therefore, it's almost impossible to produce brighter lights if you didn't start dark enough to begin with. It's another reason for starting with your darks first and then color in your lighter lights last. You'll have much more ability to play with the color relationships. And it's actually the darkest darks that help the lights stand out. Most artists will tell you, in every painting, you also need to be mindful of the percentage of darks versus lights. In this painting, it's going to be predominantly darks, probably about 25% light colors, and then 75% darker colors. Here, do you notice the subtle shift and how this is much brighter than the color that I just put down in the front of the barn? This will help the viewer understand where the light is coming from, which is from the right. And the nice thing about oils is that you can paint wet into wet, as I'm doing here. concentrating on producing even lighter lights. But notice starting dark and then adding the light highlights is much more effective than attempting to start with the highlights and then trying to paint around it with darker colors. It would be near impossible. Sometimes I also paint like this. You'll notice that I'm painting from the top to the bottom. Today I decided to go ahead and work on a few of the highlights instead of totally waiting until the other layers were done. As you begin to paint more and more, you will realize what your tendencies are. And when exactly you want to paint certain things. The key is to allow yourself to experiment. Here again, adding some titanium white that has been darkened with some ultramarine blue. But not too much, because that side of the pink barn, at least, or reddish pink, is where the sun is hitting. And so I'm trying to, once again, provide a sense of the contrast between where the light is hitting and where it's not hitting, using nothing but color rather than detail to convey the message. Here I'm laying the groundwork for the foliage, the grasses that are going to form the foreground of this painting. All the attention is really on the barns, but I am interested in conveying a sense of where the light is hitting on the ground. Varying the brush strokes vertically as well as horizontal can help give a sense of variety. Grasses that sit back farther can be painted in more of a horizontal fashion, whereas grasses that are closer up, painted in a vertical fashion, will give the sense of some depth. Allowing some of those darker darks to remain and yet mixing some is one way to produce some variety.
Are you recording?
Yeah. What you need? And here I continue with the strokes, varying the different shades. The rest of the painting is going to be nuancing some of the shapes. And so at this point, I think what I'm going to do is to stop the voiceover and allow you to simply see the strokes being placed on the painting. The parts of the painting that you're going to see now are me attempting to make small adjustments. I will add some darker tones to provide some doorways and windows into the barns for a little bit of detail. You'll also see me sign the painting with a rubber instrument that's called an eraser. It has a sharp rubber point, and I like it for signing my paintings. Otherwise, I'm going to now remind you that if you've liked the content of this video, please subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up. If you have questions, you can certainly put a question in the and I will be happy to respond as quickly as I can. But I think that most of the variety has now been placed on the canvas, as we've got the initial block and almost done. But I will stop the comments at this point. Thank you for watching, and continue to watch till the end of the video so you can see the end result of the painting that was created.
So any dog over 70 pounds, a lot of house and Tracy's house?
No. You know when you go toward Cambridge?
Uh-huh.
Those two houses out there?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in that. But it's one of the early ones.
Like where Rod and Debbie used to live? You know, my sister's pretty basic like that, though. My sister is pretty basic like that. Hers? Now, see, I thought it was kind of basic other than the colors. But I thought they were fixing to sell it. I thought. Yep. It's his family. Yep. Well, you ain't gonna be able to find another one without ruining out her husband. Oh, interesting. Whichever gets it done. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That was my question, because yeah, those aren't low-end cabinets. And they put in dark ones. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The only thing I will say is, unless they've moved their bedroom upstairs, I mean, I can see with Christy's back. They're not going up and down the steps all the time. Yep. Yep. Well, heck, Mom.